I should have asked this before this week, but just out of curiosity, anyone in here ever been a bull rider, ridden a bull, anything? Just curious, you never know. I don't see one, not in here. Okay, let's try this. How many of you have ridden a mechanical bull? Yes, my people. Yes. I'm filtering. Okay. My daughter turns 21 in June. No, turns 21 in 2 weeks. What? 2 weeks. Whew. Oldest daughter turns 21 in 2 weeks. So she's like, what were you doing on your 21st birthday, Mom? Well, part of what I was doing, honey, was riding a mechanical bull at a little place called the Palomino in the hills of North Carolina. All right, nothing to do with the sermon. Let's move on. This is the final week of grit. Grit. Talked about being gritty people. What does it mean to have grit? How do you do hard things? We talked about how do you go beyond expectations? How do you do the small things? Looking at stories in scripture from sort of the hall of faith, if you will, in Hebrews chapter 11. Well, we are going to round out this series with another hard thing. But to illustrate, I would first like to talk to you about a little insect called a floating fire ant. Now, not to be mistaken for a plain fire ant. I think we all know what those are. How many of you have ever stepped onto a fire ant hill? Let me just tell you something. It ain't pretty. It is not fun. They're everything you imagine them to be. No, I want to talk to you about the floating fire ant. Now, for years, scientists have been baffled by the mystery of the floating fire ant. When you place a floating fire ant in water, the ant will flounder, struggle, sink, and die. An ant. But when the floating fire ants band together, they form life rafts that help them survive the flash floods of the Brazilian rainforest. As a unified raft, they can even travel for months before reaching dry land. I'd like to show you a picture of floating fire ants. Those are ants. I know, it's disgusting, but hang with me. Those are little, tiny, individual ants that have come together, are connected, and can travel for months just like this. But if they were separated into just their individual bodies, they would most certainly die. So an article in the Los Angeles Times summarized this new research on the floating fire ants that seemingly unlocked the mystery of how they do this. They collected a bunch of these ants and scientists dropped them into containers of water. The ants quickly spread out and formed themselves into rafts. Each individual ant used its claws and the little adhesive pads on their legs to grip onto each other. One researcher said, at first, it just looks like a tangle of bodies and limbs everywhere. But the longer you look at the picture, the more you're able to distinguish between the different body parts and see the connection. Then the insects use the air pockets that form around their bodies to keep themselves afloat. The article concluded. The research sheds light on how deeply social insects act together, almost as if they are part of one superorganism. As one scientist says, now listen to this, the individuals acting together create an awareness of the environment that no one single ant has. I think that is such a profound statement. That alone, they seem to lack an awareness of reality and what is going on around them, and they die. But together, they gain an awareness that they would not otherwise have, and they live. So the hard thing that I want to look at today is this: connection over isolation. Connection over isolation. You all should write that down. Write it down. If you're not a note taker, write it down. I don't see anyone writing it down. There's a little pen right in front of you. You know what? Just pretend to write it down. Do what we did in school, right? Where you pretend. You know, I know the drill. Should be connection over isolation. Hebrews chapter 11. In the hall of faith that we've been in Hebrews 11. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. They were commended for their faith. Hebrews 11 is essentially a list of people in the Bible that were noted, and their stories tell of their extraordinary faith. You can read about Abel, Noah, Abraham, Moses. And then after you read about Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, there's this natural assumption, if you know the story of the Bible, that after Moses, Joshua, who led the Israelites once Moses returned to heaven, would be listed next. There's a whole book in the Bible just called Joshua. He is one of the foremost leaders in all of Scripture. It was his job to take God's people into the promised land. It was his job to take them around Jericho and to see Jericho's walls fall and to see the Israelites have their first battle victory after crossing over the Jordan River. In fact, Joshua's name actually means God saves. It only makes sense that Joshua is listed in Hebrews chapter 11. So let's go to the chapter, Hebrews 11, verse 30. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And that is the story of Joshua in Hebrews chapter 11. Here, throw that verse back up there. What do you notice? Do you notice anything? Who is getting the credit for the fall of Jericho? By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. Who is getting the credit for Jericho? This is not a trick question. Yes? Who's mentioned? She is mentioned. Go before. First sentence. Jericho fell after who? The army. After the army marched, Jericho fell. Not as Joshua led the army, Jericho fell. Not as Joshua gave instructions and the army marched, the walls fell. He is never mentioned. His name never comes up. So in this Hall of Faith chapter, the one credited for the first battle victory in the promised land is not the leader, it is the people. It's the people. Because for those walls to fall, it would take so much more than any kind of horsepower that Joshua had under the hood. No matter how strategic, how strong, how godly, how connected he alone was to the Lord, that he did not have enough in him to do what they'd been called to do. And so in this chapter of faith, it's the people, the connection needed for victory. It is connection over isolation. It is together rather than alone. See, we all have walls we would like to take down. What are walls? Well, walls are frankly just obstacles. The walls were an obstacle between God's people and the people of Jericho. It was this huge thing that while it was there, no one is going to be able to have victory. A wall is anything you keep trying to get through to get from A to B. But this huge monstrosity of a thing keeps getting between A and B. Sometimes we view the wall as another person. This person is such a problem, I cannot seem to get from here to here because of them. Or this weakness of mine is such a problem, I can't get from here to here because I have this weakness. This health struggle, this financial struggle, this job struggle, this character flaw, this sin in my life is this wall that I desperately need to come down. But let me just suggest to you that walls don't come down like those kinds of walls if you're trying to do it on your own. They just don't. It is connection over isolation to do, this is where I say this a lot, but like if we were like having coffee together or if you're, still looking for Jesus and you drink tea, like I would lean over the coffee table and I would look at you in the eyes and I would say, to do what God has called you to do, you will need people. You nor I have enough horsepower under our own hood to do what God has plotted and planned out for our lives. We all need people. See, God wasn't looking in Joshua, he wasn't looking for a hero. He wasn't looking for a superstar. He wasn't looking for a celebrity. He had to make sure that Joshua was going to be okay with a supporting role. That Joshua would not need nor want to have all the glory. So let's keep reading. So Joshua goes out to scout out Jericho, as any good leader would do before they're about to take it. He goes to get a closer look. So in Joshua chapter 5, verse 13, now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied. "But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Okay, I don't know if you know much about the commander of the Lord's army. Not a single one of us would do anything other than what Joshua did. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground, right? The commander of the angel armies of God standing before Joshua. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. It's wartime. A warrior approaches. Reasonable question from Joshua: are you for us or are you for our enemies? The answer was what? Neither. Neither. Now, how can you be for neither? And his answer, "I am the commander of the Lord's army." What is he saying? I am for God. I am for his plan, his will, his desire. I'm neither for you nor for you, but I'm for him. And whoever wants to come along with him. And I think the real question in that small portion of this passage isn't so much who is this angel before him, but I think the angel really wanted to know, Joshua, who are you for? And Joshua demonstrated so clearly in this passage who he is for. He falls to his face. It says in reverence. What he asks is, what message does my Lord have for his servant? He takes off his shoes as told by the angel because it was holy ground. It is clear by this interaction who Joshua is for. And he's not for himself. He doesn't step up and go, oh, right, see, I'm Joshua. I'm the one that the Lord asked to lead his people. Moses trained me. You know Moses. He's with you right now in heaven. Yeah, I'm his protege. Tell me what you will. He falls to his face. Connection takes three things. The first thing it takes is humility. Pride kills connection. I don't think this is news, right? I'm not telling you anything that you probably haven't heard before or that you probably couldn't come up with on your own. Prideful people do not have intimate connections with other people. Okay, y'all remember, if you talk back, I preach so much better. This will just get better. Pride will kill. I mean, suck the life out of connection. Because what is pride? Well, pride assumes everything. Pride ignores, it blames, it takes credit, it builds walls. Humility listens, asks questions, is open, doesn't need credit, owns its own stuff. And do you know that pride, we typically associate pride with very arrogant people, right? We think of this person that seems to be overly confident, overly arrogant. We say they're full of pride. Do you know that pride also comes in the form of insecurity? Because pride is simply being consumed with yourself. When the bulk of your thoughts are about yourself, good or bad, pride is a struggle for you because you're always thinking about other people's response to you. And it makes relationships difficult. You know this. When you suffer from deep levels of insecurity, relationships are hard. Because of the constant validation and the constant completion you're looking for from someone else. Arrogance makes relationships hard. You cannot have a relationship with someone that is in relationship with just themselves. Pride kills connection because it is impossible to fully engage with someone who is fully engaged with their own ego. In James, little tiny book towards the back of the Bible that has people, I kid you not, have tried to remove from the Bible countless times over history. They've wanted to take this book out. In fact, we're going to go through the entire book in May. Super excited. But James 4:6 says this: God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Leave that up there for me. See, what is so profound about this, it doesn't just say God doesn't like pride, he actually opposes. That's an active word. So if you are prideful, you can actually experience God's opposition. If you are unwilling to lay down your pride, if you are unwilling to own your stuff or admit your weakness or confess or be vulnerable, if you're unwilling to lay down any credit you feel you deserve, you might just feel a wall, but it might be the Lord saying, until you can surrender, until you can be face down in reverence, I'm going to keep you here until you learn humility. And so often we think, well, Lord, why can't I have this? Why haven't you allowed me here? When can I do such and such? And how much of that is the Lord waiting on us to decide who we are for? Are we for ourselves? Are we for him? Who are we for? It says he shows favor to the humble. It's always fascinated me through life as I've watched and I've seen the least likely, sometimes the quietest, sometimes the one no one would ever expect because they have no need to be seen, be the ones that have the greatest impact on the kingdom of God. There are people that I think if Hebrews 11 were to be continued, if we could still add names, there would be people added to this list that neither you nor I had ever heard of because they humbly and quietly fought to further the kingdom of God. Humility. Apologizes, it admits, it asks for help, it lifts others up, and it lives for God's glory. So after this heart examination between the angel of God's armies and Joshua, they continue the conversation. Joshua says, what message does the Lord have for me? In Joshua 6, starting in verse 2, then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. Notice it's in past tense, like it's already done. I've already delivered this, Joshua. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. What a bizarre plan. I mean, truly, right? Is this not bizarre? Is this not? See, understand, like if you've read parts of the Old Testament, the Israelites did not know a battle of any kind other than violent battle. Battles were about bloodshed. You go in and you remove the obstacles and you take the enemy down. Here would have been a moment of utter confusion. 600,000 armed men, over 500,000 walking around a city for days quietly. Every day. Once on the first day, once on the second, on the third, on the fourth, on the fifth, on the sixth. Have you ever had a week that has just gone by and it feels like it's been a year? Like somehow between Sunday and the next Sunday, you've lived 10 lives? Can you imagine being an Israelite, holding the sword, but being told you can't use it? Imagine walking around the property of your enemy who's watching you, probably mocking you. They're just walking. And they're just walking. And then on the seventh day, it was a change up, total change up. On the seventh day, he says, at the long blast on the shofar. Now, the shofar was a ram's horn, and they would blow the shofar as a symbol for many things. But in this particular instant, at the long blast on the shofar, we will yell, the walls will come crashing down, and we will take the city. So the plan is, warriors, walk around, and then when I blow this ram's horn trumpet, so to speak, we're going to yell, and the walls will fall. Now, we don't read in this chapter, it doesn't indicate to us that the Israelites argued a lot about this, or that they were frustrated by this, or that they said to Joshua, you're an idiot. We knew we should never let you be in charge. Where's Moses? See, I think they did it because they believed. And I think that the people are the ones in Hebrews chapter 11 because they chose by faith to believe, to humbly place themselves below the authority and the direction of the Lord. See, they hadn't forgotten what he did at the Jordan River. Hey, remember back here when the waters parted and we walked across on dry land? Remember that? Well, the same God is telling us to do it differently, and we're going to do it. But the part we can't miss is that it wouldn't work if everyone was not committed. See, connection also requires commitment. Commitment. Apathy. Apathy would be the enemy of commitment. Those walls falling required being all in by every person. Towards the end of the New Testament, Jesus says, you're either hot or cold. You're either in or out. And if you're lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth. There is no, I'm sort of in, I'm sort of out. I'll say like fall instead of fall, I'll see how loud everybody is around me before I decide how loud my rally cry will be. I'm going to kind of get the lay of the land. Maybe the group of people around me will yell loud enough they won't notice that I'm not yelling. You're either in or you're out. And apathy is the enemy of commitment. One thing I say often, I love new Christians. And I always say, because new Christians do not know that you actually can be apathetic as a Christian. They come to know Jesus and they're so transformed. They are some of the most passionate, vocal, demonstrative believers that they are. And it's only after they spend some time in the church and they look around at other Christians who don't seem to carry that same kind of contagious passion, that rather than the lukewarm Christians rising to their passion and fervor, we find a lot of believers falling to the lower bar of apathy. I love news because they don't know yet, right? They just know they've been saved. The shofar was the sound that was to signal their cry, and then they were to rally. The shofar is mentioned 72 times in the Old Testament, the entire Old Testament. 14 of those times are in this one chapter, Joshua chapter 6. Why is that important? Because the shofar was traditionally used to signal God's presence. It was to symbolize the beginning of worship in the temple. So, the shofar, it's blown. It's the sound. And I've heard a shofar blown. It's not pretty. It's like a ram's, it's an animal's antler, for lack of a better word. The sound is blown through it, and it is the symbol of God's presence. It is the moment that tells everyone we are going to worship. Can you imagine? I mean, to some degree we do this, but it can be different every week. But there is a moment, whether it's a downbeat from a guitar or a welcome from a host up here, or a note being sung by a vocalist. There is a moment that signifies we are in the presence of God and we are going to worship. And I watch people decide whether to enter that or just sit back. But see, for the walls to fall, it required humility and commitment by everyone. By everyone. 600,000 warriors who had been trained for battle. They're carrying their swords, and God says, don't use the thing that you think will win you the battle. Use the thing that I'm telling you will win the battle, and just commit. Just go all in worship of me, in reverence of me, in acknowledgement that my presence is with you. All right. You ready to be uncomfortable today? You're like, I thought I already was. No, it's about to get worse. In fact, go ahead, like some of you just put your coffee down, like set it down so you have all your limbs free. Put your phones down. Okay. I am going to count to 3. And on 3, I want us to lift up a rally cry. So let's just pretend for a moment that we are around Jericho and we're looking up at this huge wall, and the only way it's coming down, the only way we win this battle, and by the way, winning the battle means that their family gets to have a home. Their family and generations after them get to inhabit the promised land. This is not just a battle, this is a step towards the fulfillment of hope. And so they stand there and they look at these walls and the shofar blows. And I'm going to count to 3 and we are going to rally cry. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I love you guys so much. I had anticipated needing to say, okay, let's do it again. I don't even need to do it again, do I? I don't even need to do it again. Some of you are like, I want to do it again. Let's do it, you know. It doesn't matter what you say you're committed to. It's what you do that demonstrates what you're committed to, isn't it? You can say you're committed all you want. And our life really does demonstrate what we're committed to. And it may not be what you think you're committed to. If you want to know what you're actually committed to, you should ask someone close to you, hey, what does it look like I am most committed to right now in life? And then be willing to hear it. Because sometimes we mistake our intentions and what we want to be committed to for what we're actually committed to. But if we looked at our behavior, that tells us what we're committed to, because what you're willing to do shows you who you're for. And I'd also like to note, committed is different than obligated. Obligated lacks heart. Commitment is full of heart. Commitment is, I want to do this. Obligated is, I have to do this. Large difference. So I wonder if there are things in your life to evaluate and go, am I operating under an obligation or am I operating under a commitment? And I've got to align my heart with God's so that I move from obligation to commitment. Because it requires the commitment of all of Christ's followers to accomplish the mission of Jesus. Humility, commitment. You know, here at Madison Park, our mission is to show people who Jesus is. And we have some values that drive that. Talk about obedient risk, talk about unwavering mission, irrational generosity, contagious passion, unconditional love. We know that distinctly God has called us to reach the lost, to serve the least, and to raise up leaders. That is who we are, and that's what we're about as a church. But it will never be accomplished if it's up to me or to this person or that person or even a small group of people. What this requires is for everyone that says they're a part of this to look around and connect, because we could go for months together in ways we can't go one day alone. I think in our world, we're actually celebrated if we do things alone. How many times have we watched people do something alone and we say, look at them, they're so strong. Look at that single mom, all that she's doing. She's so strong, all by herself. Look at that person suffering from that illness. They're so strong, doing it all by themselves. I had a conversation with a friend of mine a little over a week ago where they were letting me know that someone very close to them had taken their life. My first statement was, I am so, so sorry. But because this person lives states away from me, my second question was, do you have people? Where's your family? Do you have friends? Will your church community come around you? Because I know, just like the song we sang, when darkness comes and fear makes us tremble, you're not getting through that alone. You're not getting through that without support. Correct. So, helping her and walking her through, connecting with those people, letting those people know what's going on so that she's not alone. See, we have a lot of things in our life that we walk circles around. I mean, I do. I'm guessing you do. I've got 3 kids, married, got a high-pressure job. I have extended family. My mom is battling cancer. I've got my own individual battles, and sometimes it feels like this is just what we do. Like we're just walking around it. We walk and we walk and we walk. And we keep hoping that the next time we walk will be the time that everything changes. And I think more often than not, as we're walking and we're looking at the obstacles and we're looking at the walls, we're reading about the diagnosis, we know all of the stats that are stacked against us, all of the people that are getting in the way, all of the choices all of these people are making that are making it really difficult. We just keep walking and walking and walking, and nothing is changing and nothing is changing. And right about the end of lap 6, we quit. Well, God's not doing anything. He's not showing up. I've been doing this now for most of my life, and I'm looking at it, and I'm telling you what, nothing is changing, and it's certainly not changing on the timeline that I think it should be changing. I've been battling this addiction since I was 11. Here I am. I'm 40, I'm 50, I'm 60, still battling this addiction. I'm just walking. My child is so far from God. They're making all kinds of decisions that are so ungodly and are causing them such pain and are wreaking such havoc on their lives. And nothing I say seems to stop it. None of my prayers seem to be answered. They're just doing it. My marriage has been falling apart since day 2. And here I am, and I'm just walking around it, and I've been trying to do my best. I'm trying to do the things that the sermons tell me to do. I'm praying. I'm even reading my Bible. I tried for so long just to sacrifice and to give all of myself to this thing, and yet it still looks like this. And so I wonder a couple of things. 1, have you stopped before the 7th day? And 2, are you doing it alone? Are you walking around it alone? Or have you told people that you can trust, hey, my marriage is struggling? Hey, my kids don't serve the Lord. You know what? I thought they would. Hey, you know what? I've got this secret sin in my life, and I've been trying to keep a face and hold up a line, and I just, am not getting past it. I've been suffering from it for years and years and years. Have you told anyone? Are you struggling in your mind with depression or anxiety? Darkness overwhelms, and you just keep trying to do it on your own and walking by yourself, and the walls are not falling. Have you told anyone? Because if you think that you're going to be able to travel miles and miles on your own, please don't be surprised when you sink after a day. Because connection doesn't just require humility and commitment. Connection requires sacrifice. You might just have to sacrifice your time to go to a meeting or to go to counseling or to go to the doctor or to meet with a pastor or to talk to somebody. You're going to have to sacrifice time. You might have to sacrifice some of your treasure. You might have to readjust where you spend money to spend money on things that will help you heal rather than things that will bring you harm. You're going to have to sacrifice. You're going to have to keep walking when you don't think you can walk anymore. Walking 1 time a day to walking 7 times a day is an alarmingly large leap. There wasn't a workup of march once on the first day, twice on the second day, 3 times. It didn't go that way. once every day until you get to the final day, and then you do it 7. So at the end, when you don't think you can do it anymore and you're questioning whether God's even going to show up, and you started believing that the plan is stupid and there's no way that you're yelling, there's no way that you're going to give the rally cry because you haven't seen any progress, it is at that point of sacrifice that the walls fall. As a church, that is what this will take. Connection is so hard. We have never lived in a time that it has been so easy to be isolated. If quarantine showed us anything, it's that we can survive isolated, right? Completely. You can live this life completely isolated and survive. Everything can be delivered. Everything can be ordered. But there's been nothing positive to come from it. I chose this for the message on grit because, in my opinion, it takes grit to stay connected. Because it takes grit to push through when things go sideways in order to find restoration and reconciliation. It takes grit to stay committed in the highs and the lows. It takes grit to stay committed when you don't see the progress you were hoping for. It just takes grit to keep walking. One of our staff members are friends with a family whose son was killed this last week, killed in Anderson. And when she was telling us about this and telling us what happened, my first thought was, I'm so sorry for that family. And my second thought was, man, this place needs Jesus. And man, these towns, these places need Jesus. Do you know there's over 85,000 people just in Madison County who claim to have faith in nothing? Nothing. You can look it up on the census. Like they didn't check anything. And you know, people do check some things even if they're not committed to it. Over 85,000 people believe in nothing. No God. They're walking life alone. And here we are. So I often wonder what would happen if when we're dropped in the river, we look around and we start to navigate our way to each other. And we put our limbs out and we join together and see how far we can run with this. I don't know what all the different walls are in your life that you're looking at. My encouragement to you would be to tell someone and keep walking. And as for this church, we are going to keep telling the stories and we are going to keep walking.